This video is to support students for Sports Facilities Assignment 1, Task B. This will follow on from the 10 review logs and will be submitted on Turnitin as a conclusion document. This will be a maximum of 1500 words, no less than 1000 words. The aim here is to complete the final question, which is to highlight potential issues and recommendations for industry professionals when designing and planning for the next generation of sports and leisure facilities. I've set the context at a regional standard, so we're going to ignore local issues and international and national issues. So I'm looking for medium to large scale facilities and how they look moving forward. So this is a reflexive piece. I'm asking you to predict, I'm asking for opinions, and you will need to support these opinions with effective evidence both from the academic literature you've completed already, so the 10 review logs from Task A, plus additional research, reference articles from academia, books, popular culture, but there has to be a general mix. If you need to support your ideas with multiple references from popular culture, then that won't be rigorous enough. So websites, BBC, media outlets won't be enough, but I will be looking for a mix of maybe governmental information through reviews, sports councils, information from Office of National Statistics, as well as academic literature that you may already have accessed through the review logs or additional. I'd like this final section to be split into three distinct areas. All should be linked and should flow into each other. So the first key question will be, out of the three sectors for sport, that being state, public sector, the not-for-profit and voluntary sectors, and private sector, I'd like you to have an initial discussion in this final piece around who you feel will be the key drivers moving forward, who will be developing most facilities out of those three sectors, and why, and what are the key drivers for that. You will have to access some of your initial review logs for this discussion, and you will also have to access maybe government policy documents to see where the government are driving the agenda, where new developments are happening at the moment, and what these facilities, what are the key drivers for this. Following on from that, the key drivers may well be social issues or political issues, economic or technology. I don't want a bullet-pointed pest analysis. I want a discussion around where you feel the key drivers contributing to future facility development. This should help you in your discussion with which sector will drive this forward. So if you feel that the industry will become, the sports industry will become far more privatized and market focused, then these key drivers will be important to follow on from that statement or that line of argument. It will also help shape what our future facilities will look like. So for example, if we take the fitness industry, if we feel that the private sector are going to drive the facility infrastructure forward, then we may look at the fact that more mass participation activities tend to be fitness related. Key users tend to be people in terms of adults 16 right the way through, because we have an aging population. They don't necessarily want organised formal training sports, team sports, and are looking for a diverse range of activities. The economic drivers may be that there's the economic crisis and various other economic factors, people losing their jobs, average incomes. You can get that sort of information from Office of National Statistics. Therefore, the low-cost leisure, low-cost sport is still going to be a key driver for the market moving forward. So not just who and what they're interested in, but what circumstances are they in. Add then that final layer of technological advances on top, so equipment design, materials used, for example 4G pitches, that then is creating new opportunities, indoor ski domes, with the political drivers in the UK at the moment, which are fairly, in terms of a generic term, neoliberal. So we've seen the government move in leisure out of central public sector for a number of years, since the 80s and the Conservative governments through competitive compulsory tendering, then New Labour into best value, into the current situation that we find ourselves in terms of austerity and continuation of that neoliberal, in terms of state reducing its provision of non-statutory services like leisure and sport. So that sort of section I want you to identify for your overall argument, which is either the state is moving this forward, not-for-profit sectors moving this forward, or private sectors moving this forward. I want you to use the key drivers to continue to justify your overall perception of where this is going. Those first two sections should then really set you up to have the discussion about what these facilities will then look like. So if it's state focused, how we can continue to embed and support the sports that the government are focused on, which tends to be certainly at the elite level in the investment around the Olympic and Commonwealth sports, or are we going to become purely market driven? So we're going to purely react to the customers' needs, wants of the masses, which may largely ignore the Olympic sports. And again, evidence for this can be found through participation trends data, through Sport Wales or Sport England. Sport England have a 2013 document that show decreases in most of the Olympic sports since 2006. So if we are going to take a market focus driven, you may use this sort of information to help justify some of the activities and the sports that you feel in a private sector context that they would focus on. And if you feel it's going to continue to be state funded, you may say that because of that investment, the new state funded facilities will continue to focus on Olympic ideals and Olympic sports, and that's the way it's going to move forward, and subsequently programming and activities. So really I'm asking you to consider that macro environment, what the industry and the competitive situation is going to be moving forward. We've talked about PEST being part of the framework here, but I also want you to think about key drivers and what the scenarios will be. I'd like you to propose some scenarios. So not necessarily ask you to design one facility, but what those facilities and the issues that might be considered and the activities that might be involved in those facilities moving forward. So the crux of it will start with, do you see predominantly the state, government and public sector driving facilities, not-for-profit, private, or a mix, and where that mix on the spectrum sits? So for example, do you feel that moving forward it will be the public sector and not-for-profit driving sport and facility development in the next 50 years, or do you see that not-for-profit, private sector, or do you feel that private sector will be the dominant force? I'd like you to clearly articulate that argument and ensure that the rest of your document is consistent with that argument. You will need to use evidence throughout, not just making statements without support. So consider the key trends, recommendations and research that's available to you. For example, look back, consider the historical context of how we've developed in terms of facility provision, not just in Wales but maybe across the UK. Where we are, consider the information that's available through some of the reviews that we've looked at, Sports Facilities Review, Carter Report, some of the reports out of Scotland. Consider the age implication. So the Carter Report, even back in 2005, identified the ageing facility infrastructure, but again, who the current providers are in the most recent facilities. So you have evidence, and I'd like you to use that to justify your argument. The more evidence you use to justify the argument, the greater the grade. Using those key skills and good habits that you've been picking up through the review logs. Don't just make random statements without support. Clearly articulate, provide that support. Consider what you're using to justify your argument. Are you using a BBC Media article? Is that credible? Is that valid? And would it stand up under scrutiny versus several peer-reviewed articles, or peer-reviewed articles plus additional industry reports? Those contexts, public, not-for-profit and private sector, will have a different emphasis on this kind of product development or definition of facilities moving forward. The state might not necessarily consider customer needs, whereas the private sector will focus primarily on customer needs. Therefore, you need to spend your time focused on, if we're going to be market driven, what does the market look like now, what might it look like moving forward, and how that influence. If it's the state in there considering their strategic priorities rather than customers, then you're going to focus more on the regulatory environment and the key strategies moving forward. So if the Welsh Government or the UK Government are continuing to invest in Olympic sports, you may argue and look at their strategies as the key drivers for facility development. All will have issues around technology and patterns of change and the overall competitive infrastructure, and what will that look like? So will we see a saturation of facilities like low-cost gyms, and what impact will that have? What will they start looking like? Will we have two-tier environments where low-cost facilities and hyper facilities with all the trim-ins in terms of spas and so on? That's for you to discuss and debate and put forward. As long as there's clear lines of argument and support, then that's what I'll be looking for. So essentially, these future facilities are what I'm looking for, and I need you to clearly articulate who will be running them and what will they look like. 1,500 words will be the maximum, 1,000 words minimum, and I'd like you to use those review logs that you already have, plus the additional resources on Moodle throughout the facilities Moodle site, and there should be plenty there, plus additional research if you start to discuss a certain line of argument, to have this initial debate. Finish off the section with some concluding statements, and make sure that you've supported everything throughout with effective referencing. Be careful and be mindful of paraphrasing the work that you use, and do not get caught up in trying to copy and paste key chunks of text from a lot of these articles and debates. Try and make your arguments clear from the outset. Use the key drivers to support that clear line in terms of who will be running it, state, not-for-profit, private sector, and then clearly articulate what influences will affect these facilities, next generation moving forward.